The following teaching is by Jim Pugh through the Ministry of God is Government. If you have never listened to one of our Bridge of Truth podcasts and wish to see all the topics taught through this Bridge of Truth ministry, please go to www.godisgovernment.com to find the inventory of Bridge of Truth podcasts. Now, welcome Jim Pugh as he presents another historical study of truth from history, Bible scripture, or current events.
The final kill strikes on America, war without end. Michel Chossudovsky in 2015 wrote an article titled, The Globalization of War. In this article, he states, the period extending from the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, to the present is marked by a succession of U.S.-sponsored theater wars, Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yugoslavia, various forms of military intervention, including low-intensity conflicts, civil wars, the Congo, Angola, Somalia, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Sudan, military coups, U.S.-sponsored death squadrons and massacres, Chile, Guatemala, Honduras, Argentina, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, covert wars in support of al-Qaeda, freedom fighters, Soviet-Afghan War, U.S.-NATO covert wars using al-Qaeda as foot soldiers, Syria, U.S.-NATO-sponsored humanitarian military interventions, Libya in 2011, aerial bombings combined with support to al-Qaeda rebels. The objective has not been to win in these wars, but in essence to destabilize these countries as nation-states, as well as impose a proxy government which acts on behalf of Western interests. Accounting for these various operations, the United States has attacked, directly or indirectly, some 44 countries in different regions of the developing world since 1945, a number of them many times. Proof of the lifeless condition of the United States came with the avuncular figure's failure to respond to the mysterious circumstances surrounding 9/11 and the possibility that the country had been subjected to one of the most horrendous false flag attacks in human history. Such attacks had become commonplace. On August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein ordered 500,000 Iraqi troops to invade and occupy Kuwait. The reason for the invasion as reasonable. Kuwait, while IRA was locked up in a deadly war with Iran, had pilfered $2.4 billion in oil from the Rumdia oil field, an Iraqi oil field, and still, Kuwaiti Emir Jubeir al-Ahmad refused to absolve even the interest on Iraqi's debt to his country. This development posed no threat to U.S. national security, but it jeopardized the interests of the House of Rockefeller and the House of Rothschild, which feared that Hussein would invade Saudi Arabia and absorb the oil fields in the Persian Gulf. These two banking families controlled the world's largest oil companies, including Exxon and BP. They had created Saudi Aramco in the 1930s and remained the largest purchasers of Mideastern oil. This position enabled them to establish oil prices, a position that became threatened when Saddam Hussein's invading army appeared at the Saudi border. The Reagan administration, under the guidance of George Shultz and other CFR members, had sided with Iraq during the decade-long Iran-Iraq War. It had shelled out billions in agricultural credits and hundreds of millions of dollars in advanced weaponry to Saddam. The weapons were transported to Iraq by a circuitous route through Egypt and Saudi Arabia, since the House of Saud was also intent upon ending the reign of the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. The United States under Reagan further equipped the Iraqi army with satellite intelligence supplemented by AWACS, airborne warning and control systems, reconnaissance that could be used to direct weapons against Iranian suicide brigades. False flag number 1, Saddam AS baby killer. But when Saddam Hussein ventured into Kuwait, President George H.W. Bush, a prominent CFR member, became intent upon launching a war against America's old ally. Bush's ties to big oil interests, including Standard Oil, were extensive. Early in his career, he made millions with the drilling of the first offshore oil well in Kuwait. He also became associated with the Carlyle Group, a leading defense contractor, which numbers the Saudi royal family and the government of Kuwait among its customers. In this way, Bush Sr. was wired to the Rockefellers, the Saudis, and the military-industrial complex. Members of his cabinet were similarly wired. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, a CFR director, became the chief executive officer of Halliburton, and Secretary of State James Baker, another CRR member, became senior counselor of the Carlyle Group. The problem for Bush was how to justify U.S. military involvement against Iraq. Amir Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait, was certainly not a sympathetic character. Stories were widely circulated about his syphilitic, kept 70 wives, and married a virgin every Thursday. The answer to the problem came with the raising of a false flag. Bush and his cabinet began to circulate stories that Hussein had ordered his soldiers to enter Kuwaiti hospitals in order to remove babies from incubators and to cast them on the floor to die. Repeating this concocted tale 5 times over the national airwaves, Bush said, "I don't think that Adolf Hitler ever participated in anything of that nature." The Persian Gulf War. On January 14, 1991, Bush Sr. launched the Persian Gulf War, which, as it turned out, wasn't much of a war. But it did allow the military-industrial complex, thanks to 24-hour television coverage on CNN, to showcase their latest technology in warfare stealth bombers, cruise missiles, smart bombs, and laser guidance systems that pinpointed targets and minimized civilian casualties. Within a matter of days, the Iraqi Air Force was obliterated, along with airfields, missile sites, and communication centers. Throughout Iraq, most means of modern life were destroyed. All electricity-operated installations ceased to function. Food could not be preserved, water could not be purified, sewage could not be pumped away. 9,000 homes were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Following the war, economic sanctions were placed on Iraq, which resulted in a shortage of medical supplies and food. Malnutrition and disease increased at an alarming rate. By 1998, nearly 1 million Iraqi, mostly young children and the elderly, had died because of the embargo. Diseases that had been nearly eradicated reappeared, including polio, cholera, and typhoid. Cancer rates soared due to a proliferation of the uranium used in the smart bombs. In 1993, physicians discovered a new disease. Iraqi mothers, too malnourished to breastfeed and unable to buy powdered milk, began feeding their babies sugared water or tea. Almost all the babies died. The doctors called them sugar babies. Shortly after the Persian Gulf War began, Middle East Watch, a New York-based human rights organization, sent investigators to Iraq to verify the stories about Iraqi soldiers entering hospitals and removing infants from incubators. They were unable to locate any doctor, nurse, medical worker, or mother of a newly born child who could support the accounts that had caused the conflict. False flag number 2, the Kosovo massacres. Bush was not alone, is raising a false flag to initiate a war in order to protect the interests of the CIA, the defense contractors, and the money cartel. In 1999, President Bill Clinton ordered the U.S. Air Force, under the auspices of NATO, to conduct a bombing campaign that reduced Kosovo to a mound of rubble. Between March 24th and June 10th, 37,465 missions were flown, destroying every stronghold of the Christian Serbs. The bombing was justified, Clinton and his administration argued, because the Serbs were committing genocide by murdering thousands of Muslim Albanians for the sake of ethnic cleansing. Since Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia, Clinton blamed Slobodan Milosevic for the alleged atrocities and compared the Yugoslavian president much in the same manner that George H.W. Bush spoke of Saddam Hussein to Adolf Hitler. Though his ethnic cleansing is not the same as the ethnic extermination of the Holocaust, the two are related. Both vicious, premeditated, systematic oppression fueled by religious and ethnic hatred, Clinton told a group of 200 veterans of foreign wars members at the National Defense University at Fort McNair. Stories surfaced in the New York Times and the Washington Post about a massacre in the small village of Rakak, where the bodies of Muslim Albanians were left to rot in the street. Investigative reporters from Le Figaro and Le Monde were dispatched to verify these accounts. They discovered that the bodies had been placed in unnatural positions, that the site of the massacre was completely devoid of cartridges, and that the villagers were unable to identify the victims. Another widely circulated story used to justify U.S. intervention concerned a mine in Trépaia, where thousands of bodies of Muslim Albanians were allegedly dumped. In the wake of the war, a French gendarmerie spelunking team descended half a mile into the mine to the bottom in search of bodies. They found none. Some villagers said that the bodies were burned in a nearby furnace. A second French team inspected the ashes. They found no teeth, no bones, and no trace of human remains, siding with the enemy. For aid in their struggle for independence, the Muslim Albanians turned to Bin Laden and the Mujahideen. By 1995, more than 6,000 holy warriors from Chechnya, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia had made their way to the Balkans in preparation for the struggle against the Christian Serbs. Bin Laden visited the area 3 times between 1994 and 1996 to establish al-Qaeda training camps throughout the Balkans. He also shelled out $700 million to establish the Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA. The purpose of this organization was to drive the Christian Serbs from Kosovo, to topple the government of Slobodan Milosevic, and to unite the Muslims of Kosovo, Macedonia, and Albania into the Islamic Republic of Greater Albania. President Clinton, along with Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Secretary of Defense William Cohen, and CIA Director George Tenet, all CFR members, praised the KLA as freedom fighters. In no time at all, millions of US dollars were flowing to the Muslims rebels in the form of military training and field advice. The United States was now in league with the terrorist group that was purposely intent upon its destruction. History doesn't get any crazier than this. In the wake of the war, more than 200 Christian churches and monasteries in Kosovo were put to torch. Accounts surfaced of the mass execution of Serbian farmers, the murders of scores of priests and granny killings, the drowning of elderly women in bathtubs. Of the 200,000 Serbs who lived in Kosovo before the war, only 400 were left when the conflict came to an end. Hidden reasons for the war. After the Christians had been purged from Kosovo, the Pentagon established Camp Bondsteel on the border of Kosovo and Macedonia. This massive military base came to house over 6,000 U.S. troops. The purpose of the camp was to protect the Balkan route, whereby heroin flowed from Afghanistan via Turkey to Western Europe. Another purpose of the 1,000-acre military installation was to provide protection for the Trans-Balkan pipeline, which was to channel Caspian Sea oil from the Bulgarian Black Sea port of Burgas to the Adriatic. The feasibility study for the pipeline had been drafted by the engineering division of Halliburton. And so the pattern persisted. False flag after false flag was unfurled to bring the United States into military conflict, while the American people, sapped of their strength and spirit, remained incapable of responding with cries of indignation, let alone outrage America had become a corporation and its citizens were not stakeholders. False flag number 3, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, President George W. Bush and his CFR cabinet proclaimed that Saddam Hussein was now in league with al-Qaeda and planning an attack on American soil that would eclipse the events of 9/11. Hussein, they maintained, had developed weapons of mass destruction that would soon be unleashed upon the hapless inhabitants of major U.S. cities. This false news repeated over and over again on 532 separate occasions by Bush, Vice President Cheney, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State Colin Powell, and Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. A sampling of their false states is as follows. On August 26, 2002, in an address to the National Convention of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Vice President Cheney said, simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us. On September 8, 2002, Cheney appeared on Meet the Press and announced, we do know with absolute certainty that Saddam Hussein is using his procurement system to acquire the equipment he needs in order to enrich uranium to build a nuclear weapon. On September 19, 2002, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld told Congress that Saddam has amassed large clandestine stockpiles of chemical weapons, including VX, sarin, and mustard gas. On September 28, 2002, President Bush in his weekly radio address to the nation said, the Iraqi regime possesses biological and chemical weapons, is rebuilding the facilities to make more, and according to the British government, could launch a biological or chemical attack in as little as 45 minutes after the order is given. This regime is seeking a nuclear bomb, and with fissile material, could build one within a year. On March 16, 2003, Vice President Cheney appeared again on Meet the Press. This time he said, we believe Saddam Hussein has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons. On May 29, 2003, President Bush, in an interview with Polish TV, declared, we found the weapons of mass destruction. We found biological laboratories. You remember when Colin Powell stood up in front of the world and he said, Iraq has got laboratories, mobile labs to build biological weapons. They're illegal. They're against the United Nations resolution. And we've so far discovered two. And we'll find more weapons as time goes on. But for those who say we haven't found the banned manufacturing devices or banned weapons, they're wrong. We found them. Blood for oil and natural gas. None of it was true. No weapons of mass destruction had been found. No plans to develop nuclear bombs had been made. No biological laboratories that were fabricating sinister germ warfare. The laboratories that Bush declared the U.S. invading forces had found turned out to be innocuous facilities that were manufacturing hydrogen for weather balloons. Despite the fact that Saddam Hussein was dragged from a hole, placed on trial before a kangaroo court, and lynched, no ties between the Iraqi ruler and al-Qaeda were ever substantiated. The war was launched to create a strategy of tension within Iraq. This allowed Anglo-American big oil companies under control of the money cartel to seize Iraqi oil fields and to further their control over the world's supply of energy. Immediately after Bush announced mission accomplished, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and BP set up shop in Iraq, along with a slew of oil service companies, including Halliburton. Another purpose was to further the plans for the construction of a natural gas pipeline that would run from the North Pars, an Iranian port city, and the Persian Gulf to Damascus, Syria, via Iraq. Most European countries remained dependent upon Russia for its supply of natural gas. Therefore, the pipeline would serve to cripple Russia economically while furthering the interests of the House of Rockefeller and the House of Rothschild. Plans for the conquest and occupation of Iraq had been in the works for several years. In Winning Modern Wars, General Wesley Clark writes of meeting Pentagon officials shortly after 9/11, who said the military campaign included the invasion of 7 countries, beginning with Iraq, then Syria, Libya, Iran, Somalia, and Sudan. False flag number 4, Gaddafi. As a mass murderer, in 2011, when Islamic extremists took up armed Gaddafi in Libya, the U.S. national news outlets, in tandem with the CFR administration of President Barack Obama, announced that Libyan ruler was planning the mass murder of men, women, and children in Benghazi to cover the populace into submission. Therefore, Libya had to be bombed in smithereens for the sake of humanity. Justifying the bombing, Secretary Hillary Clinton said, "We had a murderous dictator threatening to massacre large numbers of the Libyan people. We had our closest allies in Europe burning up the phone lines, begging us to help them try to prevent what they saw as a mass genocide, in their words. And we had the Arabs standing by our side saying, 'We want you to help us deal with Gaddafi.'" Unmasking mendacities. Of course, it wasn't true. On March 12, 2011, Gaddafi announced to the rebels in Benghazi, "Throw away your weapons exactly like your brothers in Ajdabiya and other places did. They laid down their arms and they are safe." We never pursued them at all. Subsequent investigation revealed that when Gaddafi regime forces retook Ajdabiya in February 2011, they did not attack or kill any innocent civilians. The Libyan ruler also attempted to appease protesters in Benghazi with an offer of development aid before finally deploying troops in an attempt to end the rebellion. What's more, an Amnesty International investigation in June 2011 could not corroborate any allegation of mass human rights violations by Gaddafi regime troops. It rather uncovered evidence that rebels in Benghazi made false claims and manufactured evidence. The investigation concluded Western media coverage had from the outset presented a very one-sided view of the logic of events, portraying the protest movement as entirely peaceful and repeatedly suggesting that the regime's security forces were unaccountably massacring unarmed demonstrators who presented no security challenge. Siding with the enemy? Part 2. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the organization of the rebels who opposed Gaddafi, was closely associated with al-Qaeda. Secretary of State Clinton and President Obama were well aware of this fact before they deployed bombers and troops to topple the Gaddafi government. A U.S. intelligence report issued months before the bombings contained this finding. There is a close link between al-Qaeda, jihadi organizations, and the opposition to Libya. Oil-rich Libya was the most prosperous country in Africa. Education, medical treatment, and electricity were free, and gas sold for 42 cents a gallon. Women who gave birth were supported with cash grants in couples, with cash gifts from the government on their wedding day. Libya's state bank provided loans without interest and provided free startup capital to farmers. Gaddafi's crime against the money cartel. Gaddafi's independence from big oil and the money cartel was the cause of his demise. Earlier in life, Gaddafi's goal was to organize Arabs as a bloc that could withstand Western demands and depredations. He turned to Pan-Africanism and refused to join the U.S. Africa Command. Gaddafi also attempted to introduce a gold-based African currency that would free Africans from American financial hegemony. Gaddafi used Chinese energy companies to develop Libya's energy resources, thereby passing the interests of Anglo-American big oil and banking establishments. The power elite, already upset with Russian presence in the Mediterranean, became faced with Chinese presence as well. Gaddafi was playing ball with the wrong people and that he had to go. On October 20th, 2011, during the Battle of Sirte, Gaddafi was found hiding in a culvert by the rebel forces. He was beaten with rifle butts, sodomized with bayonets, and shot several times in the head. Upon receiving word of Gaddafi's demise, a gleeful Hillary Clinton said, "We came. We saw. He died." An unanswered question. Is ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, a creation of the Obama administration, the CIA, and the U.S. State Department under Hillary Clinton? This question, which was raised by Donald Trump during his campaign for the White House, was dismissed as absurd by the national media. But evidence points to an affirmative answer. Gordon Duff, senior editor of Veterans Today, confirmed that the ISIS terrorists were trained in Jordan and Syria by U.S. Major General, retired, Paul E. Vallely, and other senior military consultants. Vallely is a Fox News military analyst and the founder of the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare School. To establish his case, Duff has provided videos of Vallely and other American military officials with ISIS commandos. Support for this startling assertion was provided by Aaron Klein of WorldNet Daily, who unearthed evidence that the ISIS forces were and are trained as a secret U.S. military base in the Jordanian town of Safawi. This report has been corroborated by Der Spiegel, Germany's leading news magazine. Additional support came from Edward Snowden, the National Security Agency whistleblower, who provided classified government documents that show that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, is a CIA operative. Muslim confirmation. Leaders from the Muslim world confirm these findings. Nabil Naim, the founder of the Islamic Democratic Party, who appeared on the pan-Arab TV station Al Mayadeen to say that all current al-Qaeda affiliates, including ISIS, work for the CIA. Naim could be imparting false information, but his claim is upheld by Baha al-Araji, Iraq's deputy prime minister, and other leading Iraqi officials. Mr. Iraqi is a devout Shia, and Mr. Naim is a militant Sunni. The two men share little in common and have completely different political and religious agendas. The covert purpose of ISIS. According to several news analysts, the purpose of ISIS is to create a state of endless war that will serve to exhaust Saudi and Iranian military resources, to bring down the dissolution of Syria and Iraq, and to collapse the Arab countries into small states that can be manipulated by a U.S.-dominated money cartel, which seeks control of their natural resources. This thesis is supported by classified CIA documents that affirm that arms for ISIS came compliments of the U.S. from the arsenal of Muammar Gaddafi. The shipment of these weapons to ISIS in Syria was supervised in 2012 by David Petraeus, the CIA director who would soon resign when it was alleged that he was having an affair with his biographer. The Patriot Act. As a result of the endless wars without borders, the citizens of the United States became stripped of the liberties once viewed as God-given by the Patriot Act of 2001. No longer did they possess freedom of association. The government now could monitor religious and political institutions without suspecting criminal activity to assist terror investigation. No longer were they granted freedom of information. The government closed once public immigration hearings, secretly detained hundreds of people without charges, and encouraged bureaucrats to resist requests for the disclosure of public records. No longer did they possess freedom of speech. The government could prosecute librarians or keepers of any other records if they told anyone that the government was seeking information related to a terror investigation. No longer did they retain a right to legal representation. The government could monitor federal prison jailhouse conversations between attorneys and clients and deny lawyers to Americans accused of crimes. No longer were they free from unreasonable searches. Government could search and seize their belongings, including their personal papers, without probable cause for the sake of a terror investigation. And no longer were they granted the right to a speedy and public trial. The government now could jail anyone, including its citizens, without a trial on charges of terrorism. In the past, these rights characterized the citizens of the United States, who deemed them so precious that they were willing to die to sustain and uphold them. But at the dawn of the 21st century, they had surrendered them without a whimper. They were no longer Americans. They had become citizens of the world.
You have been listening to Bridge of Truth, brought to you by biblical teacher and author Jim Pugh with God is Government. For free access to all of Jim Pugh's Bridge of Truth podcasts, please go to www.godisgovernment.com. Distribution of the Bridge of Truth and all other teachings are available for worldwide distribution. Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of Bridge of Truth.